So in this video, I'm going to be using this Motip spray putty to smooth out some of those pesky layer lines on an FDM 3D print and some resin bits as well. And the reason I'm using this is to try and smooth out this big old beastie right here. I have no idea what caused me to do this, but here we go. So for some bizarre reason, I decided I wanted to print off this giant scale beastie Terminator. I've been doing a lot of Legions Imperialis stuff at the moment, and they're absolutely tiny, so I figured why not go the opposite end? And I figured I'd use my Bamboo Lab P1Ss just to see how quickly I could get this done. So I printed most of this in PLA, part of it was in ABS just because I had some like kicking around and I wanted to try it out. But the problem that you've always got with that, especially when it comes to big, large prints, when it comes to things like helmets or any props and stuff like that, is you get layer lines, even when you print at a low layer height. So this was all printed at 0.12mm layer height, and still, when it came off the printer, obviously you are getting some bits on there. So I started printing it off, and I wanted to see how well I could smooth it out. And the original plan with this was to print it all off in ABS, and use some like acetone smoothing. But it's really cold outside at the moment and I didn't want to mess around out there. And also I've never done that before as well, and it just seemed like an absolute hassle to go through. Definitely seems like something would work, but I figured why not try something different? So I looked around on the internet and a couple of people suggested this spray putty. And I hadn't really found too much on it, so I figured I would give it a go and see how well it turns out. Now this Motip spray putty is relatively cheap in comparison to some of the other brands that I saw online and some of the ones that I did see recommended, so I decided to pick it up, not too sure what to expect. So I printed most of the parts off on my Bamboo Labs. The only parts that I did in resin are their face and also the shoulder pads as well, because I figured they were going to be a bit more central to the model overall and I wanted a bit better quality, but actually in the end, I didn't probably need to. Now I got a bunch of different grit sandpaper, but to be honest, I was lazy, and that's probably a theme throughout my channel, and this technique works really well if you're very lazy when it comes to smoothing things out, and you could definitely get better quality than what I have. So basically, I just used 80 grit sandpaper on that, so the really coarse stuff, just to try and smooth out some of the big glaring layer lines. So I didn't go absolutely mad, I just did it where I kind of figured I could see the most things. So like on his knee pads, for example, on his shins as well. There's a lot of smooth surfaces on this, and I figured if I didn't get those sanded down, they would show up a lot. But I didn't do the best job of this. So I got it all smoothed down as best I could, and then I moved across onto the gluing it together, which was an absolute nightmare because gravity was fighting me and I had to like lean this against things as I was gluing bits together. But eventually I got there. Once it was all glued together, it was time to use the Motip spray putty. Pro tip here that I didn't do is wash your model after you've sanded it. I don't know why I missed that step out, but ultimately I did. And it means that after I did all the spray painting and everything else, I've still got loads of little bits from where I've been sanding it down that got stuck into it, as you can imagine, because I didn't clean it. So they weren't just going to magically disappear. So just give it a wash. And then it probably is worthwhile using a finer sandpaper at that stage just to give it a once over, but I didn't. So like I said, it's quite a lazy, quick and easy process to get this finish, but you could definitely do better. So I grabbed the Motip spray putty, and the thing to do with this is you meant to use it in stages, so go over it slowly. Don't blast it all over, otherwise you will gum up some of those details. So I just gave it a spray all over, and then I left it for about half an hour. Then I came back and I gave it another spray. And all in all, I gave this 2 like full coats of the spray putty. And I came back in some of the areas where there was just a bit more work needed, and I gave it a 3rd blast, leaving half an hour between every single time. Once you've sprayed it all down, you can go back in there after a couple of hours and sand that down if you want to get a really, really smooth surface. So you can come back in and give it a good sanding, then give it a wash, and then use the spray putty again if you want to. So if you want after a really smooth surface, if you have to something like armor, for example, something that's going to be a bit of a showstopper, something you really want to stand out, then just give it a clean up afterwards. I didn't. I just basically left it to cure, and I came back after 24 hours, and then I hit it with some black primer. So once the black primer was all down, dried and cured, I used this Rust-Oleum red, and I really like the way this comes out. It took about 3 coats, so I gave it a spray and then I left it. And if you go too heavy with this, it will run all over the place and you will absolutely ruin your model. The thing to bear in mind is you're probably not going to do too much work over this afterwards, apart from in the areas where you want extra color. You're not going to add some highlights and bits. So you want this stage to look really good. So I gave it about 3 coats, leaving about half an hour between every single one of them. And then I had to leave it for about 24 hours to cure. And you can smell this stuff as well, so try to do it outside or have somewhere else you can put your model. But I gave it a good spray, and then it was time to go on to the painting. Now, with regards to the painting, I didn't manage to capture much on camera because, as you can imagine, this is big, and trying to kind of paint it and have a camera there and everything else, it got really difficult. But basically, I just went back in with some blacks for like the Aquila, for his gun, for any of the other parts on there. Threw in a couple of colors as well for like his eyes, the lights on there. And then for the sword, I got my airbrush out and I blasted it the same way that I do my normal Terminators and tried to get some like glow on there as well. It kind of works. I like it, and yeah, it's looking pretty cool. The red armor looks really good, so this next bit I was kind of worried that I was going to ruin it, but I went back in there with a sponge and some silver paint, and I just hit around like the edges, some of the shins, just some of the areas that I wanted some battle damage on his face, for example. And once I'd added sort of like that damage and everything else, I went back in with a black oil wash and did some like panel lining, which at this size is kind of easy, but also not. Because I've got such a smooth surface, as I was kind of putting that black oil and everything else in there to line some of those panels, it does spill over a little bit. The great thing about an oil wash is, as you know, if you've watched anything on my channel, you can go back in there and wipe it up afterwards. Even if you leave it for like a day, you can go back in with some white spirits and reactivate it and clean it up. And this Rust-Oleum stuff is a really, really nice hard coat. It's very easy to clean. At that stage, he was pretty much done. I'm really impressed. This is the absolute smoothest that I've ever seen an FDM print. Like I said, the face and the shoulders, they're resin, so that's not too bad. The problem is, I think that the resin shoulder guards actually look worse than the rest of the model, just because I didn't clean up where the supports were that well, so there's these big pits and stuff like that. But apart from that, this thing looks really smooth. And like I said, I was lazy with this. I literally sanded it once, forgot to clean it, sprayed it, and then went on with spraying. Realistically, you should sand it with a finer grit, spray it, and then if you want to sand it again and get it even smoother, you could do. And if you did that, you would be able to smooth this out incredibly well. The one thing that I would say is for smaller models or anything that's got a lot more detail, so it got me thinking, like you could print off something like a Titan, for example, in FDM, and rather than messing around with a resin printer and then smooth it all out. But in hindsight, you probably couldn't, because some of the details will get gummed up. Around the teeth on these skulls, for example, it's not too bad, but I have lost a little bit of definition when it comes to some of the detail on there, so just something to bear in mind. If you spray this too heavily, you will start to lose some of that detail, but it doesn't gum it up too much, and if you go sparingly and you build up those layers slowly, you can get a really nice finish on this. For comparison, and I'll have some close-up shots of this, this is one of the first prints that I did at the same layer height quite some time ago. And this is basically smoothed down with sandpaper, so starting off with that really coarse sandpaper to a finer, cleaning it in between it, and then using the same process for painting. So I used like a black primer and then some green Rust-Oleum. And ultimately on this, you can see the layer lines an awful lot more versus something like my Terminator. This spray putty is kind of like a miracle in a can when it comes to this. And I definitely recommend trying it out yourself if you're doing things like props, really big prints that don't have loads and loads of fine details, and just seeing how that works out for you. No idea what to do with this next. I kind of want to print a squad of them, but that just seems insane. Who knows? Hit that like button, and maybe if I get enough likes on this video, I'll see what I can do. So let me know in the comments below, have you used this spray putty before? Do you recommend it? What other methods do you recommend for smoothing out things like your FDM prints? It'd be great to know and share with the community. So thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button. Come along for some more just weird, random 3D printing tips and tricks in the future. I'll see you soon. Bye.